For a long time, Daniel believed enlightenment would arrive like light. He imagined it as a quiet explosion behind the eyes, a golden peace descending over the body, a certainty so pure that the old noise of being human would finally fall silent. But when it began, it did not feel like light. It felt like suspicion. Not suspicion toward other people at first, but toward the ordinary explanations he had used his whole life. The world did not change in any obvious way. His apartment was still small. The train still groaned beneath the city every morning. His phone still filled with messages he answered too late. People still asked how he was and looked away before he answered. Yet something in him had stopped sleeping. The first sign came on a Tuesday afternoon, in a used bookstore 3 blocks from his office. Daniel had gone in only to escape the rain. He was not looking for anything. That was what made it strange. He walked past the psychology shelf, past the old religion section, past rows of books with cracked spines and penciled prices. Then his hand stopped on a thin gray volume he had never seen before. He opened it to the middle. The first sentence said, "The life you refuse to examine will return as circumstance." Daniel stood still. For months he had been trying to decide whether to leave his job. On paper, the job was fine. It paid well. His manager liked him. His parents called it stable. His friends told him not to throw away security because of a feeling. But every morning, walking through the glass doors, Daniel felt something inside him become smaller. He had called it boredom, then burnout, then entitlement, then fear of commitment. He had named it everything except betrayal. He closed the book and put it back. Outside, the rain had stopped. That night, on the train home, 2 strangers stood beside him, arguing softly. He did not want to listen, but one sentence rose through the metal noise with impossible clarity. "You already know. You just want permission." Daniel looked up. The woman who had said it was not speaking to him. She was looking at the man beside her, tired and kind and irritated. But Daniel felt the sentence enter him like a key. The next week, the same thing happened again. A song came through the speakers in a grocery store while he stood holding a basket of things he did not need. One line repeated 3 times, "You cannot heal where you keep pretending." He laughed under his breath, but the laugh was not amusement. It was fear wearing a small mask. He began to notice that these moments did not come when he was asking life for comfort. They came when he was avoiding honesty. When he told himself he was fine, someone nearby would say, "You look exhausted." When he convinced himself a friendship was harmless, a dream would show him standing beside a locked door, knocking from the inside. When he wrote a polite email, accepting one more impossible deadline, his computer froze before he could press send. At first, Daniel tried to explain it all away. Coincidence was a useful word. It allowed him to remain intelligent and untouched. But the coincidences kept gathering, not dramatically, not like miracles, but like quiet witnesses. He began to understand that reality was not answering his ego. It was not flattering him. It was not making him special. It was answering the part of him that had been whispering the truth for years. This was the first thing only those with spiritual enlightenment can experience. Reality begins to answer you, but only when you stop lying to yourself. Not because the universe becomes a servant, not because every billboard is a prophecy, not because the enlightened person is chosen above others. It is stranger and more uncomfortable than that. When the mind becomes a little less defended, it starts receiving what was always there. The sentence in the book, the stranger on the train, the song in the grocery store, the delay, the ache, the repeated pattern. None of these things force meaning into your life. They reveal the places where meaning has been pressing against the glass. Daniel learned quickly that the signs were not always gentle. One evening, he met his friend Marcus for dinner. Marcus had built a life out of certainty. He spoke in plans, numbers, timelines, and reasonable warnings. When Daniel told him he was thinking of leaving the firm, Marcus leaned back and smiled, the way people smile when they are about to protect you from yourself. "You're tired," Marcus said. "Don't confuse exhaustion with truth." Daniel almost accepted it. It sounded wise. It sounded grounded. It sounded like the sort of sentence a mature person would say. Then the waiter came to refill their glasses and, without knowing the conversation, said to Marcus, Sometimes people are tired because they're carrying the wrong thing. Marcus laughed. Daniel did not. Something in him went quiet. He did not quit his job the next day. Enlightenment did not turn him reckless, but he stopped pretending the heaviness was meaningless. He stopped asking for a clean sign and started admitting he had been surrounded by signs for years. His body had been one. His resentment had been one. His envy of free people had been one. His sudden tears on Sunday nights had been one. The outer world had only begun to speak because the inner world had finally been heard. And once Daniel heard it, life did not become easier. It became harder to ignore. That was the part nobody had warned him about. The first awakening did not feel like being guided by a gentle hand. It felt like losing the privilege of convenient confusion. Before, Daniel could say, "I don't know what I want," and the sentence would protect him. Now it sounded false the moment it left his mouth. He did know. He had known for a long time. What he lacked was not knowledge. It was the courage to stop negotiating with a life that no longer fit him. After Daniel left the bookstore that day, the second change came quietly. It did not arrive as a vision. It arrived during a conversation with his sister. Her name was Elise, and she had always been the bright one in the family, the one who spoke quickly, laughed before rooms became tense, and called everyone dramatic. Before anyone could ask whether she was hurting, she invited Daniel to her apartment on a Sunday afternoon. The place smelled of coffee, lemon soap, and something overcooked. Her husband had taken the children to the park, so for once the rooms were still. "I'm happy," she said, before Daniel asked. He looked at her. She was standing by the sink, washing the same cup again and again. Her voice was light, almost cheerful, but her shoulders were lifted too high. Her smile appeared a second before the sentence and disappeared a second after it. A year earlier, Daniel would have believed the words, or rather, he would have accepted them because accepting them was easier. People told you what they wanted you to know, and politeness was the agreement not to ask what the body had already answered. But now, he heard something else. Not a voice, not a supernatural message, something simpler and more terrible. He heard the silence beneath her words. He heard, "Please do not make me say the truth out loud." He heard, "If I admit I am lonely, I may have to change something." He heard, "I need you to believe me because I am no longer sure I believe myself." Daniel did not expose her. That was the first discipline he had to learn. Awareness is not permission to invade. Seeing beneath a person's words does not make their hidden pain your property. So he only said, "That sounds exhausting." Elise stopped washing the cup. For a moment, her face hardened. Then her mouth trembled. She looked at the window above the sink and whispered, "I don't know why I'm so tired." Before this, Daniel had thought listening meant paying attention to language. But language, he discovered, is often the final layer, not the first. People speak from their wounds, long before they speak from their mouths. At work, he heard it everywhere. His manager said, "We're a family here," and Daniel heard, "I need your loyalty to cost less than your labor." A coworker said, "I don't care who gets credit," and Daniel heard the small hunger in his voice. A client said, "No pressure," in a tone built entirely out of pressure. Someone praised a colleague too loudly, and beneath the praise, Daniel felt a thin thread of resentment. He did not become cynical. That surprised him. In the past, if he had seen this much hidden motive, he would have judged everyone. He would have called them fake, manipulative, weak, dishonest. But the more clearly he heard people, the less simple judgment became. He began to see that most lies are not born from evil. They are born from fear. People say they are fine because needing help once got them punished. They say they are not jealous because jealousy would ruin the image they depend on. They say they only want the best for you because admitting control would make them feel cruel. They apologize without remorse because guilt feels unbearable, but accountability feels even worse. Human beings do not only use words to reveal themselves, they use words to survive themselves. This made Daniel softer in some places and sharper in others. He became softer because he could feel the scared child behind many adult performances. He could see how much of what people call personality is really protection. He could hear the old wound hiding inside the new opinion, But he became sharper because compassion no longer required him to be fooled. He could understand why someone lied without agreeing to live inside the lie. He could feel someone's pain without letting that pain become a weapon against him. He could see the frightened person beneath the controlling behavior and still step away from the control. This was lonely. At dinner tables, he noticed marriages held together by unspoken bargains. At parties, he watched confident people scan rooms for evidence that they mattered. In friendly jokes, he heard envy, asking to be forgiven because it had arrived wearing humor. In spiritual circles, he heard people speak of peace while their eyes begged to be seen as advanced. Sometimes Daniel missed the old surface. If someone smiled, they were kind. If someone said sorry, they were sorry. If someone said they supported you, they supported you. If someone called themselves healed, they were healed. Now, every room had depth, every sentence had weather. One night, after a long family dinner, his mother hugged him at the door and said, "You've become so quiet." Daniel almost answered with another surface sentence. He almost said he was tired. Instead, he looked at her face, at the concern there, and also at the accusation beneath it. What she meant was not only, "Are you okay?" It was also, "Please remain understandable to me." He kissed her cheek. "I'm listening differently," he said. She did not know what to do with that. Most people do not. They are comfortable being heard in the way they have prepared themselves to be heard. But spiritual enlightenment does not stop at the prepared self. It hears the defended self, the hungry self, the frightened self, the self still trying to be loved without being fully known. And this is where the gift becomes dangerous. Because once you hear beneath words, you may be tempted to believe you are above people. Daniel was tempted. He caught himself thinking, "I see what they do not see." The thought gave him a small, dirty pleasure. Then he saw the truth beneath that thought too. It was not wisdom. It was loneliness, trying to become superiority. That realization saved him from becoming cruel. He learned that the second experience was not given so he could silently diagnose everyone. It was given so he could stop worshiping surfaces, including his own. The more deeply he listened, the more careful he had to become. A person's hidden truth is sacred ground. You do not walk on it just because you can see the gate. Enlightenment begins when words stop being the deepest thing you can hear. But maturity begins when you do not use that hearing to make yourself feel higher than the people still speaking from their masks. The third experience arrived through a woman Daniel loved and could not understand. Her name was Maya. They had met 2 years earlier in a meditation class. Neither of them wanted to admit they had joined because they were lonely. She laughed with her whole face, read poetry in bed, and remembered tiny details. With her, he had known a tenderness that made him almost embarrassed. And then she heard him. Not in one clean, dramatic act. That would have been easier. She did it slowly. With disappearances she called needing space. With half-truths she called privacy. With apologies that came too quickly to contain real understanding. She loved him. Daniel knew that. She also used his patience as a room she could leave messy. Before his life began to change, Daniel would have needed one story. Either Maya loved him, therefore she could not be using him, or Maya used him, therefore she never loved him. One story would have made him innocent. The other would have made her guilty. Both would have been easier than the truth. The truth was that she loved him and still harmed him. She was wounded and still responsible. He was patient and still afraid to leave. He was hurt and still secretly attached to the role of being the one who understood more. Spiritual enlightenment did not solve the contradiction. It made him unable to escape it. One evening, they sat across from each other in her kitchen. Rain tapped the window. A candle burned between them, small and useless. Maya cried, then became angry because crying made her feel weak. "You make me feel like a bad person," she said. Daniel felt the old reflex rise in him. He wanted to comfort her. He wanted to rescue the conversation from its own honesty. He wanted to say, "You're not bad," because then he could avoid saying what was more true. Instead, he breathed. "I don't think you're bad," he said. "I think you're scared, and I think you hurt me when you're scared." Maya looked away. The sentence did not fix anything, but it was the first sentence that did not betray reality. This was the third thing only those with spiritual enlightenment can experience. You can hold opposites without needing to destroy one side. Most people think awakening means certainty. Daniel learned it often means the end of cheap certainty. The ordinary mind wants life to be simple because simplicity feels safe. It wants a clean villain, a clean victim, a clean reason, a clean ending. It wants pain to come with a label that tells everyone where to stand. It wants love to prove safety, suffering to prove innocence, and anger to prove justice. But life is rarely that obedient. A father can sacrifice everything for his children and still wound them with his silence. A friend can celebrate your success and still resent the part of you that escaped what they accepted. A person can tell the truth and use it cruelly. Another can lie and still be trying, in their broken way, to preserve something they are terrified to lose. Daniel began to see this everywhere. At work, the manager exploiting his team was also a man terrified of becoming irrelevant. In his family, his mother's control was also love that had never learned to relax. In himself, his kindness was sometimes generosity and sometimes fear of being disliked. His ambition was sometimes purpose and sometimes proof-seeking. His forgiveness was sometimes freedom and sometimes a way to feel morally untouchable. This did not make all actions equal. Holding opposites did not mean losing the ability to judge. It meant judging without reducing. Daniel could leave Maya and still love her. He could understand her wound and still stop offering himself to it. He could grieve what they had and still admit the relationship had become a place where both of them performed better versions of themselves instead of becoming honest ones. The day they ended it, Maya asked, "So that's it? After everything?" Daniel almost collapsed into guilt. The question was built to pull him back into one side of the story. Either stay and prove love, or leave and become the person who abandoned her. But something wider held him. "No," he said softly. "It isn't just one thing. That's what makes it so hard." He walked home that night feeling both broken and clean. That was new. In the past, if something hurt, he assumed it was wrong. If something was right, he assumed it would feel peaceful. Enlightenment ruined that childish arrangement. Some right choices tore him open. Some wrong choices felt warm because they repeated an old familiar wound. Some endings were merciful and devastating at the same time. This complexity made him difficult to use. Friends wanted sharper answers. Was she toxic? Are you better without her? Did you dodge a bullet? They wanted the kind of language that turns pain into entertainment. Daniel could not give it to them. Maya was not a monster. He was not a saint. The relationship was not a waste. It was also not meant to continue. Because he would not simplify, people thought he was confused. He was not confused. He was grieving without lying. This is one of the lonelier fruits of spiritual enlightenment. You stop fitting into conversations built on quick moral categories. You become slower to condemn, slower to worship, slower to join the emotional crowd. Daniel discovered that the ability to hold opposites requires a stronger spine than choosing one side too quickly. Anyone can hate what hurt them. Anyone can romanticize what they lost. Anyone can turn themselves into the hero by editing the story carefully enough. But to say, "This was beautiful, and it was not enough," requires a different kind of soul. To say, "They harmed me, and they are still human," requires strength. To say, "I was wounded, and I must still examine my part," requires the kind of honesty the ego experiences as death. It taught him that truth is not always a sword. Sometimes it is a vessel large enough to hold what the sword would have cut apart. Only a deeper consciousness can hold love and distance, pain and gratitude, truth and uncertainty, without forcing life into a smaller shape. And once Daniel could do that, he could no longer return to clean stories. Clean stories were too small for what had actually happened. By winter, Daniel had begun to trust the strange intelligence moving through his life. Not blindly, not dramatically, but enough to stop treating every inner signal as an inconvenience. He left the firm in January. He took a smaller role at a nonprofit that paid less, but did not require him to abandon himself by 9 in the morning. People congratulated him as if courage were clean. It was not. Some mornings he woke terrified. Some afternoons he missed the old salary with a grief that embarrassed him. He told himself he had chosen freedom, and he had, But he also discovered that freedom does not remove the ego. It only removes some of the places where the ego used to hide. The fourth experience began during a staff meeting. A younger colleague named Priya presented an idea Daniel had once mentioned in passing. She had expanded it, improved it, made it useful. The room responded warmly. Daniel smiled. He nodded. He even said, "That's excellent." And while he said it, he saw himself not in a mirror, not from outside his body, more like a second awareness opening behind the first. He saw the smile. He saw the nod. He saw the respectable version of himself performing support, and beneath it, he saw a small, ugly contraction. He wanted credit. Not much, just enough for people to know the idea had passed through him first, just enough to protect the image he had of himself as generous, original, above petty competition. Then came the sharper realization. He was not angry because Priya had done something wrong. He was angry because she had done something well without needing him. Daniel sat still while the meeting continued. The insight did not feel spiritual. It felt humiliating. This was the fourth thing only those with spiritual enlightenment can experience. You start seeing your ego while it is still pretending to be you. Before, Daniel had imagined ego as obvious arrogance, loudness, vanity. The person who speaks too much, needs applause, refuses correction. But the ego he began to see was more subtle. It could hide inside politeness. It could hide inside helpfulness. It could even hide inside humility. After the meeting, Priya thanked him for his encouragement. Daniel almost said, "Of course," in the warm tone of a man protecting his self-image. Instead, he paused. "I want to say something honestly," he said. "Part of me wanted credit for where that idea started. But what you did with it was better than what I would have done." Priya looked surprised, then smiled carefully. "You didn't have to tell me that." "I think I did," Daniel said. Walking back to his desk, he felt no glow of moral victory. That was another trap. The ego could turn confession into performance faster than the mouth could form words. It could say, "Look how honest I am." It could use self-awareness as decoration. From then on, Daniel began catching himself everywhere. He caught himself being silent after a disagreement, not because he was peaceful, but because he wanted the other person to feel the coldness of his absence. He caught himself giving advice that sounded generous, but was secretly designed to make him necessary. He caught himself forgiving Maya in his imagination, while still wanting her to suffer the knowledge of what she had lost. He caught himself saying, "I'm not judging," while arranging someone neatly beneath him. Each recognition stung, yet the sting was clean. It did not condemn him. It exposed him. That was the difference. Shame says, "This is what you are." Awareness says, "This is what is moving through you." Shame freezes the soul around a flaw. Awareness gives the soul room to respond. Daniel began to understand why many people stop here. It is easier to use awakening to analyze the world than to let it undress you. It is easier to hear the fear beneath another person's words than to hear the hunger beneath your own kindness. It is easier to call someone else unconscious than to notice how quickly your own consciousness disappears when your image is threatened. One night, he attended a small gathering led by a man who spoke softly about surrender. The room was full of candles, linen, and people trying not to look impressed by themselves. The teacher said beautiful things. He spoke of dissolving the ego, of becoming spacious, of no longer needing validation. Then, when someone questioned him gently, his jaw tightened, only for a second. But Daniel saw it. More importantly, Daniel felt the same tightening inside himself, the secret violence that rises when the self-image is touched. On the walk home, he realized ego does not disappear because a person learns spiritual language. Sometimes language only gives it better clothes. It can wear peace. It can wear trauma. It can wear service. It can wear wisdom. It can wear the sentence, "I have no ego," as its finest costume. This did not make Daniel distrust every spiritual person. It made him more careful with himself. He stopped asking, "Am I awakened?" and began asking, "Where am I still performing?" That question was less glamorous. It did not look good on a journal cover. It did not make him feel chosen. But it cut closer to the bone. He saw that true enlightenment does not give the ego a throne made of light. It removes the darkness in which the ego pretends to be the whole person. The ego still rose. It still wanted praise, safety, control, admiration, revenge, innocence. But now Daniel could feel it rising before it took the wheel. Sometimes he still failed. Sometimes he watched himself become defensive and could not stop in time. Sometimes he apologized only after rehearsing his innocence for hours. But even failure had changed. He could no longer fail unconsciously. That was not peace, not yet. It was responsibility. The painful grace of seeing the actor while the actor was still on stage. The most painful sign of spiritual enlightenment is realizing that the ego can use even enlightenment to protect itself. And once Daniel saw that, the path became less mystical, but more sacred, because the truth was no longer above him. It was inside the part of him still pretending. The fifth experience came after his father's stroke. It happened in March, early morning, before the city had fully decided to wake. Daniel's mother called 3 times. By the third call, he knew before answering that something had torn. At the hospital, his father looked smaller than Daniel remembered. The man who had once filled doorways with impatience now lay beneath a white blanket, half his face slack, one hand curled as if holding an invisible tool. Machines made patient sounds around him. His mother sat rigid in a plastic chair, staring at the floor like someone waiting for instructions from a god she no longer trusted. Daniel stood at the foot of the bed and felt nothing. That frightened him more than grief would have. All his life, he had carried his father as a contradiction he could not resolve. The man had worked himself nearly to death to provide for the family. He had also made tenderness feel unsafe. He fixed broken sinks, paid bills on time, and never missed a school ceremony. He also turned every emotional need into an inconvenience. He loved through duty and wounded through absence. Now the body that had frightened Daniel as a child seemed breakable, almost innocent. The old stories began fighting inside him. One said, "He did his best." Another said, "His best still hurt you." One said, "Forgive him now." Another said, "Do not use his weakness to erase your wound." In the past, Daniel would have chosen whichever story made him feel most righteous. Now he could not. He sat beside the bed and let them all be true. His father opened his eyes near noon. For a moment, recognition moved through them slowly, like light crossing water. He tried to speak, but the words came broken. Daniel leaned closer. His father's good hand moved against the sheet. Daniel took it. And suddenly the pain was not just personal. It widened. Daniel saw not a villain, not a hero, but a man born into a line of men who had been taught to survive by becoming hard. A man who had mistaken silence for strength because no one had shown him another kind. A man who had loved with the tools he had and harmed with the tools he lacked. This did not excuse him. That mattered. It only placed him inside a larger sorrow. This was the fifth thing only those with spiritual enlightenment can experience. Your suffering becomes a doorway, but never an excuse. Pain was not an identity. Pain was not meaningless. Pain was a door. And a door is not the same as a home. He saw how many people build homes inside their wounds. They confuse being hurt with being deep. They confuse having suffered with having transformed. They use pain as evidence, as authority, as permission, as a weapon. Daniel had done this too. He had used his father's coldness to justify his own distance. He had used childhood loneliness to explain why he tested love before trusting it. He had used being misunderstood as proof that he was more awake than the people who misunderstood him. The hospital room stripped that away. Suffering, he realized, does not automatically make anyone wise. It can make a person bitter, proud, manipulative, terrified, or numb. It can shrink the soul as easily as deepen it. The difference is not whether you suffer. Everyone suffers. The difference is whether suffering makes you more honest or merely more defended. There, in that sterile room, his personal life touched something ancient. Every human being eventually stands before a bed, a grave, a closed door, a failed dream, a love that cannot continue, or a version of themselves that can no longer survive. Everyone meets the same question beneath different names. Will this pain become another mask, or will it become an opening? Daniel did not receive an answer all at once. Spiritual enlightenment rarely gives complete answers. More often, it changes the quality of the question until you can no longer ask it dishonestly. Once, with great effort, he said, "I didn't know how." Daniel knew what he meant. He did not say, "It's okay." It was not okay. He did not say, "You did nothing wrong." That would have been a lie. He did not punish the moment by demanding a perfect apology from a broken man. He only said, "I know." Not forgiveness as performance, not reconciliation as a photograph, not healing as a word people use when they want pain to hurry. Just one honest human being meeting another without requiring the past to become prettier than it was. Enlightenment did not erase the nervous system. It did not turn suffering into something beautiful. It did not make him grateful for what should not have happened. It did something quieter. It made the pain impossible to waste. He could no longer use it only to defend himself. He could no longer polish it into superiority. He could no longer pass it forward and call that honesty. The wound had become a doorway, and the responsibility was to walk through, not worship the frame. On the night his father came home from the hospital, Daniel returned to his apartment and sat by the window. The city moved below him, full of people carrying invisible stories, speaking through masks, missing signs, seeking signs, hurting one another, trying again. His phone lit up with a message from Elise. "Are you okay?" Daniel watched the words for a long time. Then he wrote, "Not completely, but I'm here." Before sending it, he paused. But this sentence was neither performance nor disguise. It was simply true. He pressed send. A few seconds later, the typing dots appeared, vanished, appeared again. Daniel smiled. He smiled because truth, once terrifying, had become a place he could stand. That is the final movement of spiritual enlightenment. The signs, the hidden meanings, the contradictions, the exposed ego, the suffering that becomes a doorway, all of it leads here. Not to superiority, to responsibility. You do not become someone above life. You become someone less willing to betray what life has shown you. And if this story found you at the exact moment you needed it, maybe do not rush to call that coincidence. Maybe simply listen. Then, if there is someone in your life who is ready to hear it too, let the story reach them without needing to explain why. The real sign of spiritual enlightenment is not that life becomes easier. It is that truth becomes harder to betray.